Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Legal Talk. I am the host of the show, John Mitchell, and boy, oh boy, we have a great, wonderful, awesome treat for everybody out there today. We have with us today again, and so grateful to have her here, very special guest, immigration attorney Ingrid Perez. Now, Ingrid is over in Florida, but immigration law is federal, so Ingrid can, of course, take on anybody in the entire United States immigration wise. And you would be very, very well advised to give Ingrid a call if you got any kind of immigration matter that you think you want to be have handled by an expert immigration attorney. Ingrid, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure, my pleasure. It was once said, "We are the world, we are the children, we're the ones that make a brighter day." So let's start giving. And Ingrid has come here to give to all of us today that excellent knowledge and that excellent, wisdom and understanding of awesome immigration law and talking about the world, right? So I tie this in, right? Tie this in. This is what we're talking about with the world, right? It is increasingly a flat world that we're in, right? So people, businesses, they need to be efficient with their use of their capital, and so a lot of times people, businesses want to hire folks to do work for their business. Maybe they're overseas. So they can kind of arbitrage that a little bit, right? They can kind of get, a little bit better rate, squeeze a little bit more, efficiency out of their expenditures for their business, right? Now, a big business, freaking Microsoft or something, they might have entire departments of people that handle this kind of thing. But when you get to small businesses and medium businesses, and I know this because this is my target market as well. So when you have small and medium businesses, it's really a challenge sometimes to keep up with whatever I guess compliance issues might come about. So let's say that a small or medium business wants to hire an overseas worker, right? And what kind of compliance challenges or issues might they face, Ingrid, if they're hiring workers from overseas?
Well, I think the first question we have to ask is whether that person is going to be performing the work outside of the United States or inside of the United States, right? If the person is from abroad and they're in the United States performing the work, it's really important that the small business owner knows if this person is able to work in the United States with authorization. So that means making sure that they are I-9 compliant, within the first day or so of hiring that foreign national from overseas, to make sure that that person presents all the documents that the employer needs to verify to ensure that that person has employment eligibility or employment authorization here in the United States. And that is actually something that is not very difficult to do. The employer can go online and look for the I-9 form, print it out, and the form is the one-page self-explanatory form that the employer is supposed to fill out along with the employee at the same time verifying their documents. So that's the first thing. But if the employee is doing the work overseas, then I think for the purposes of immigration, there's not much there to consider because the work is physically being performed outside of the United States. At that point, it's really important for the employer to make sure that they are compliant as far as tax laws and whatever other financial obligations that they may owe to the government as a result of employing somebody overseas.
Right, very important. So, what I'm hearing you say is that one of the key considerations, number one thing to take into account, where is the person that's going to do the work? Where are they going to be physically located? Right.
Correct.
So, if the person is in the United States and they're going to, you're a foreign national, they've come to the United States to do this job, whatever. So that's going to create some kind of immigration challenges. So what kind of strategies would you recommend for businesses that are hiring folks from overseas? They have come here and now they want to hire that foreign person here, present in the United States to do the work. What kind of effective strategies could they put into place?
Well, I think it's just also really important to start out by saying, John, that it's against the law to discriminate against somebody due to their national origin or immigration status, right? However, an employer also has to be compliant with our laws and make sure that they are hiring people who have work authorization. So it is okay generally for an employer to ask at the beginning of that engagement with that potential employee if they're authorized to work in the United States. That is an okay question to ask. The person will usually answer in the affirmative or the negative. Oftentimes, the person may say that they need visa sponsorship, and at that point, you as the employer have to decide whether or not you are able to sponsor that person for a visa, and that is, a whole other conversation that we can get into. But that is the situation for a lot of foreign nationals who are in the United States doing specialized jobs. They can port their work visas to different employers if that job is available for them. But if that person is not in that situation and they have employment authorization issued by the Department of Homeland Security, that will usually look like a employment authorization document. And it's a document issued by Department of Homeland Security with their picture. It has a validity date and a category on it. And that person should also have a social security number and a social security card that will say on the card itself that it's available for employment with DHS authorization. So that is one clue right there that that person has employment authorization. It's important that the employer keeps track of the dates that that employment authorization document will expire and make sure to ask the employee for a new one when that document is about to expire.
And one of the things, just riffing off of that, just real briefly, I mean, I've seen the case where, DHS is really behind on issuing the renewed employment authorization, the EADs. And, there's a rule, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a rule that once that EAD is about to expire, they apply for a new one. I think they can do it in 90 days before or something like that. But then let's say it takes a DHS a while to issue their new document. Is it correct that the employer can then take the I-797, I think it's called the action letter that where USCIS sends them the person that's applying for the renewal, send them a notice saying that the renewal has been received and is in process, and that automatically, I think, extends the EAD. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're spot on, really. For many categories of work permits that we colloquially call EADs, there once you apply for an extension of that work permit, you get a letter from immigration, which is the I-797 form, that will say in the body of that letter that this automatically extends a person's employment authorization for a certain amount of time. So with that extension, the person can continue to be employed for the employer and not run afoul of the immigration law. So that is available for many categories, and that is correct. So it's really important to be mindful of those dates and keep track of the dates that an EAD expires, so that the employee is able to apply with plenty of time and they're not going to have any gaps in employment due to not having the employment authorization.
Right, because and again, correct me if I'm wrong, it's outside of my area, but if an employer hires a person who, at the moment they were hired, they have employment authorization, but then if that expires, I mean, that's the reason why you're telling everybody be mindful of the expiration date, because once that date passes, and if they don't have continued authorization, then the company can be liable for continuing to employ that person outside of the period of their authorization, right?
Right. So it's very important for the employer to also keep track of these dates. And in the event that they run out of time or forget, this is very common for small businesses who maybe don't have the personnel to keep track of all of this. But if an employee is in a situation where their employment authorization document has expired and they forgot to maybe renew or forgot to give the employer a new copy, the employer is required to notify the employee, and the employee does have some time to cure that problem. If the employee is unable to cure that problem by either showing a new employment authorization document or an extension of that document that has expired, then the employer has to take action at that point. And unfortunately, they're not able to continue to employ that worker anymore without the proper documentation, because they will run the risk of having, Department of Homeland Security, ICE, check on them. Small employers aren't always ICE priority, but you do see, raids on the news all the time for these larger employers. Sometimes you do see smaller employers too. It's not something that always makes the news, but it is something that is very important for an employer to be aware of.
So if ICE comes by and wants to do an inspection on an employer, it's going to be incumbent upon that employer to demonstrate that the people they have working there are authorized to work in the United States. And so that leads to my, I guess, kind of final question about this. What kind of recommendations would you have as far as record keeping and documentation for immigration purposes?
Sure. So it's incredibly important that every small business owner, anybody who's hiring anybody to work for their business, is aware of the I-9 reporting requirements. We call that I-9 compliance. The information is online and it's often updated. There's usually different versions of that small form that an employer has to fill out for each employee. So it's important that the employer is aware that this is something out there, publicly available, that the employer can print, fill out, and keep a copy. It's important to read the instructions. It's a very small form. It's one page for the employer to fill out and one page of instructions. Make sure that you read the instructions. And lastly, if this is something that is too difficult or too cumbersome or difficult to understand, at that point, the employer really needs to consider engaging a professional to help them with their I-9 compliance, because failure to do so can actually have worse consequences than, the amount of money they would have to pay for a professional to help them with this.
Right. Well, I know, in the tax realm, I deal with this all the time where, I tell people, look, it's cheaper to go ahead and hire an attorney that knows what's going on, because that money that you spent is going to be less expensive than facing the consequences. And I know there are fines that can happen on the civil, even if you don't talk about the criminal side of it, there are fines that can happen, and a lot of times you can avoid those fines. Even if you're a little bit out of step with your compliance, you can avoid the fines by at least showing reasonable cause, right? Like you can
Right.
demonstrate that you made a good faith attempt to comply with your legal obligations. And that's where an expert like Ingrid comes in. So if you're an employer out there, you're dealing with some folks that maybe came to this country. They're here with a work permit, temporarily, whatever. They're not permanent residents. Very important. Stay in your I-9 compliance and all the other areas of compliance for that matter. And to do that, it's very well recommended to hire or at least contact Ingrid to see if your situation is something that Ingrid can help with, right? And so, Ingrid, just to close that out, what should people do if they want to get a hold of the best immigration attorney?
Thank you. Just visit my website. It's ibplaw.com. All of my contact information is there.
Man, oh man. So IBP, that is for Ingrid B. Perez. So you can't forget it. And law, I mean, I think even my rusty old brain could remember something like that. So Ingrid, thank you so much for being on Legal Talk with us again today. Really appreciate it. And I super am looking forward to having you on the show again sometime in the future. We can talk about whatever other burning issues are out there that people want to know about.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.